It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Erwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza, good morning.
Hello, Erwin.
Esperanza, now I have to say, our segment today, before I introduce our incredibly special guests, our segment today is about the Dominies. And I have to tell you, from me to you, as someone that has been passionate about East Hampton history and folklore, as you know I have for the 36
Yes.
years I've lived here. I'm very excited about this episode because, with that being said, there's still for me a little Dominy mystery that has to be unraveled.
Oh, interesting. Oh,
Okay.
okay.
I mean, I realize I'm not the professional historian you are, and you may delve deeper into these kind of matters.
No, let
But
me let me let me qualify. I am an art historian.
okay, very good.
This is a whole segment of history that I'm not as familiar with,
Yeah, and that's why
and
I'm
that is
really.
why we have our guests.
That is why we have our guests. By the way, Esperanza, it did happen very organically. And yet again, we have to credit East Hampton Trails Preservation Society, of which yours truly is the president, to Glenn and Charles, our special guests. We had a walk with Mary Morgan, Mary Foster Morgan, and she was kind enough to really, and I didn't know about it until literally the day of, invited our special guests to talk about the Dominy. So, without further ado, Esperanza, I think I'm going to introduce them now. So, a huge Our Hamptons podcast welcome to Glenn Purcell and Charles Keller. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
It really is our pleasure. And, before we delve a little bit deeper into the Dominies, I'm going to ask you both, Glenn and Charles. I mean, they were kind enough, Esperanza, as you know, they sent us a little CV, so we have a little background. There's a design background, a textile background, a historian background. So, gentlemen, why don't you just briefly, just give our audience, let them get their feet wet into who you are a little bit.
Hi there, Charles. I was born and raised in Manchester, New Hampshire, and educated in Rhode Island, and I went to Rhode Island School of Design. I received my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, majoring in apparel, and from there I moved to New York City. And one of my first jobs was at Anne Klein, working for Louis Delolio. And I've had a career in fashion, different roles, with all the major American clothing companies, Gap, Old Navy, Ralph Lauren, that kind of thing, and have designed all sorts of clothing for men's, women's, kids. And that's pretty much my background in fashion.
Right. The real crux of it, right? I mean, I'm
Right.
so interested in understanding, knowing, learning how you came to this, what's truly a vocation. It's become a vocation beyond an avocation. I think it's a vocation for you both.
Correct. Yes.
Yes, became very passionate about the Dominy's body of work, but we were also very lucky early on to meet Charles Hummel of Winterthur Museum.
Since we're maybe you should start about our house and trying to figure out.
Yes, so okay, so we purchased our home and we began to restore the home and wanted to furnish it with local antiques, artwork, etc. And
And Glenn, may I interrupt for one moment? Is your home
Sure.
also a historic home, as in it's an old home also, or it was just the contents that you wanted to have?
no, it's also an old home,
Yeah,
but one from 1898, so not really early, but early enough.
correct. Okay. Okay, so go on. I'm sorry.
Sure. So we met Eliza Werner of State Street Antiques in our shopping around for local items, and we purchased a couple of pieces of furniture there, and she one of them was a candle stand, and it was listed as a Dominy candle stand, and we wanted to know more about the Dominies. She loaned us her copy of With Hammer in Hand by Charles Hummel of Winterthur Museum, and to study up on the Dominies. And that's where we became absolutely fascinated with the Dominies' work, and really actively started looking for that type of furniture and items.
So at the time when we first received the book, I was fascinated. I turned the page and there was the Dominy house, and I thought to myself, where is this house? And
Yeah.
I soon learned it doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down, unfortunately. And as I started turning the pages, I realized that these people, these craftsmen really had a varied career. They made a lot of different pieces. So every page I turned, it was a chair, it was a clock, there were tools. It was really a rich history of this family documented in this book.
Now, I have to just interrupt because I want to really frame this for our audience now. Obviously, you have design sensibility. You were living in an old house. You wanted to stay true to all of those different kind of missions. But specific to Dominy and the Dominy family, were you were you just aware of them, like just contextually? Yes, we know about the Dominies. You didn't really, there wasn't a deep dive before that, right? Like it sort of just came about in a very matter of fact, organic kind of manner.
Absolutely. It was from the moment that Eliza Werner of Sage Street handed us her book to read up on the Dominy's body of work. So that is when it started.
Yeah, it was a whole new world. Glenn and I did attend functions at the Historical Society, and I'm sure we had seen a few pieces here and there of Dominy, but it didn't make the same impression to us as seeing this book with a body of work. And when we first started looking into the Dominies and understanding more about them, we thought there was a very finite amount of furniture out there. We never thought we would be able to acquire even one piece. We didn't realize the volume of pieces that they made.
Yeah.
Right, right. And but there must have been something, I'm just curious, there must have been something that when you did acquire those two pieces early on, there was something in the craftsmanship. I mean, beyond she gave you a book, but you were obviously intrigued somehow to know more about the craftspeople.
For sure. But just the fact that they were here in the village, it intrigued us. And the quality of their work was so exceptional.
Oh, they were around the corner from your house.
Yes.
Imagine. Oh,
Which
wow.
added a lot of interest as well.
Of course, that would
Yeah.
totally pique my interest. Amazing. I mean, and this is for those who don't know. I mean, I actually had a neighbor who was a Dominy descendant, and I didn't learn about that until after I don't know how many years of living down the road from her. But how this is multiple generations of Dominies that you've been following their work, right? Four
Absolutely.
generations?
Yes, the four were the specific to this body of work, which is basically 1740 to 1840. It's like 100 years
Mhm.
of that body of work. So, but Charles and I, of course, were extremely passionate about history. And that is another reason why we even purchased our home here or came to East Hampton, because we loved history. We come from mothers who loved and grandparents who loved history. So it was that all was kind of passed down to
Yes.
us. And of course, my mother was a genealogist. And so I have that background and I lived around her with that. And that actually became a very important part of our research in linking the found objects of Dominy back to the original logs through the family members. They were passed down. So
So to your point, Esperanza, it wasn't just the pieces of furniture that intrigued us. I think it was the whole story. It was,
Yes.
as Erwin was saying, this mystery of the Dominies. Who were these people? What happened to their house? We wanted to know more about the furniture and the craft and learn as much as we could.
and also we wanted to meet the descendants. And since we've actually met probably 30 different family members through the United States from our work, they've come to us, and we've fortunately gotten to meet them and learned other stories that they remember as children. So it's been a rich study.
And what's always been fascinating to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about uh, their background in furniture, obviously, because that's
And clocks.
and clocks, which is perhaps most germane. Their versatility, as Esperanza, do us a favor for our audience. Their oeuvre, right? Yes, yeah. Their the Dominy body of work. If you, they're Glenn and Charles, I'm from Queens, okay? I can't say this word in the same, beautiful manner that Esperanza does and has used numerous times on our Hamptons podcast, but I make that attempt. Their oeuvre is just it's a very broad, covering a lot of things. Esperanza mentioned clockmaking, furniture, but there was building as well. I mean, am I correct in all of what I'm thinking here? As I try to
Absolutely.
unravel, that could be the topic of the title of this podcast, Esperanza, Dominy's Unraveling the Mystery, because that's what we're trying to do here. So, yes, Glenn, I apologize.
Yes, they were incredible builders of homes. There were several homes around town that we know of, that they built the entire house, and or the window sashes or the doors. There's in the logs that they list the doors that they built for families. So they were the go-to finest craftsmen that you would hire for your property, for your clock, your chairs, your furniture, your metal work, and the windmills. Look at the
Mills,
windmills.
yes. And the engineering that went into those windmills is incredible.
Absolutely.
So if we transport ourselves, you gave a timeline here, 1740 to 1840, right? That
Yep.
was really we're going to call that uh, that was the prime time, if you will, for lack of a better term, of the Dominy. So
Yes.
now, were the Dominies essentially also entrepreneurial? In other words, they would be hired to build a house for someone or to renovate a house for someone. They would get I don't know if they used the word commission in the 1800s, but would someone commission them to build furniture for them? I mean, was that the kind of thing they were essentially a business as well? They were, am I correct?
Oh yes, they were the go-to, the business over there on North Main Street. If you wanted a clock, you go in and talk to them about what type of clock you wanted, an elaborate, a simple timepiece. You had X amount of pounds and shillings to spend, and they would construct a clock for them. And there were other details that the customer would ask for. And that goes for the furniture too. And it depended on how much money a person had to spend on a piece of furniture, which would dictate how much detail would be put into it, or something that was also very just basic and simple. I mean, the families here were very religious families, and most of the furniture were simple, very non-flashy items, neat pieces is what they were called.
Utilitarian
A
in a sense.
utilitarian, but also there's an aesthetic quality to them that's very understated, but they're beautiful.
Absolutely. And your point about utilitarian, the largest part of their work, which people don't really talk about, were the utilitarian pieces, as in the woolen wheels, the reels, the flax wheels, the spinning devices, just items for looms. They also made looms for people for fabric production and carpet production. Most of the items, wagon wheels, for example, rakes were enormous. I mean, there were so many rakes made, buttons for people, grain cradles, the list goes on and on. So we know about the clocks first and foremost because they're the most flashy and very wonderful, complicated pieces. And then you get to some of the more complicated pieces of furniture. But all the other stuff, people don't really realize that they were very involved in.
There were other craftsmen and furniture makers in East Hampton at the time, and they are documented. And I find it quite interesting that sort of the Dominies rose to that position, and people still know them as, the furniture producers or the clock producers in East Hampton. I just wanted to make that note that there were other people in town producing items.
Like, could you name just a couple of names, just out of curiosity? Like, were they Millers, Bennett's? I don't...
Yes, so there were Conklins, there were Bennett's, Millers, different craftsmen in the town, and Parsons. They're listed in Dean Faley's book on Long Island is My Nation is very good in covering these early craftsmen in East Hampton, Sag Harbor, and Southampton.
Awesome.
So there were many.
There were
But the
many.
Dominy,
There weren't, just like a Target that you could go to.
Right.
People were making things to. This was all subsistence out here, so you made everything for yourself, right?
that's correct.
That's right.
And the Dominies probably became the more famous of the group because of the clock making. And also the other part of their clock shop, which was the real money maker, was the repairing of pocket watches. And everyone had to have their pocket watch repaired a couple of times a year to keep it running properly. So that is an enormous logbook on the watch repairs, the pocket watch repairs. And that was actually the second book that Charles Hummel wanted to or began to write, and he actually finished it. It was just never published because he learned after pulling together all the entries from the logs that he had trouble finding actual pocket watches because what we found was most of the families melted down the pocket watches during the Depression. And also, they were very difficult to operate and to keep working, maintaining them. So families just kind of tossed them aside. So they were basically melted down.
Interesting.
There's an enormous amount of material that came through that clock shop.
But also, were they, and correct me if I'm wrong, dare I use this word, but were they also even inventors? Like, did they create things that, you mentioned the looms and things like that. Were they sort of, we know how technologically advanced they were just from the windmills and everything else for their era. But would you refer to them as innovators in a lot of ways in terms
Yes.
of some of the ways they actually assisted an industry to
Yes.
improve?
For example, they invented a sawmill powered by wind to be transported to Honduras. Yes, and it was sent down on a sloop. It was a guarded sloop because it was such a valuable piece of equipment. And it went down from what family in Sag Harbor?
The Rysam family.
Of course. The Rysam family to their plantation in Honduras to harvest the mahogany from the mahogany groves they had there and then ship it from the port. They were able to cut the mahogany trees, to the perfect size to fit on a ship to ship back to Sag Harbor.
A lot of space.
Yes. So that was something that they invented and they made a couple of those. And also the sawmill they built over here on North Main Street that no longer exists, which sat in front of the Farm Museum, where they did a little bit of archaeological dig there to find remnants of the building. But it sat there. They invented all types of things. They invented a little mouse and a rat trap device. Have not found those, but they're out there somewhere, or maybe they don't exist anymore, but they're hopefully out there in someone's barn. But the list goes on and on. They were inventors and extremely talented.
Now, you mentioned you were tracking down these families and descendants from other parts of the country. Did they, when they were in operation, was their operation were there Dominies in business in any other parts of the country, or really was this their Esperanza? Get a load of this term. Was this their world headquarters, East Hampton, Long Island? Were they
Yes.
anywhere else, Glenn?
No, this was their headquarters. And after 1840, things started falling apart because you have the Industrial Revolution that came in and put a lot of what they did out of business very quickly.
Mm.
So Felix Dominy, saw the writing on the wall, and he actually took a position for the lighthouse in Fire Island, and he moved there to establish that lighthouse. Um, and he did fairly well with that position, but he was here and there making his clocks because he actually became a clockmaker from his grandfather, Nathaniel Fourth, where his father, the fifth, focused mostly on the furniture. But anyway, Felix did fairly well by being the lightkeeper there and running the property in an inn. They had an inn there for the first guest of Fire Island to visit. And there was a lot of activity and a lot of writing about those visits of people. So, but anyway, that was where it kind of ended after that. It kind of dispersed. His son lived here, did several odd jobs just to put food on the table. He had a lot of children, did some really good things for the village, but they no longer had their business as the grandfather and great grandfather. It pretty much ended with the Industrial
Yeah,
Revolution.
I guess and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I'm sort of almost going back to high school social studies here, Esperanza, but it's as if the Industrial Revolution, as you talk about automation, whatever term you want to use, uh, that made craftsmanship was almost like the beginning of the end of fine craftsmanship. I mean,
Yes.
it's a very general and broad statement, but I mean, it's probably as things became automated and something that the Dominies took whatever a month, 2 months, however long it might have been to make. Now with automation, it could be churned out in half the time, a third of the time. That's when that's when their business model started to fail.
Humble, absolutely.
Wow.
Yes, yes.
And I found
Unfortunate,
it,
but
I find it notable that because I'm thinking, wow, they're making all of these amazing things and they're being shipped worldwide apparently. Yet they lived comfortably, and I'm sure, I mean, this is not just one person crafting these items. They must have had people employed to help them. They trained them, I'm assuming, and you can elaborate on that, but that they weren't super prosperous. They never acquired a massive amount of wealth through their craft. It was really more a comfortable existence.
I would agree with that. Yes. They were lucky enough to buy property here up on Accabonac. They bought 100 acres up there, where the Dominy Cemetery is. They and bought lots and property in Montauk. But you're correct. They made a decent living. They were comfortable. They had a great property here in town during that period up to 1840. Then it started to dwindle in the next 50, 60 years. So, but you're right. I mean, they were very prosperous at that time, and but they weren't considered very wealthy.
Yeah, yeah.
And of,
And then another thing I'm thinking also is, Erwin and I talk about this often, is when the train came and how that changed the face of this community. And I'm thinking, well, yes, the train came, and so with it, products and things that couldn't be easily brought as much as in the past. I mean, as
Yes,
it was in the past. Yeah.
you're right. I mean, the train was coming after they kind of started falling apart. And then that's when the products were able to come into East Hampton to supply the local families much easier. Things started to unfold at that point of just a different way of living. Absolutely. And you had the summer colony families who came at that time.
Right. And they didn't jump on that bandwagon, interestingly enough.
Yeah, I think they lost their a mojo with what they had known for 100 years. And it was with the Nathaniel the Seventh, he was really dabbling in so many things, trying to make a living. You could see that it was, and he had, as I said, so many children to support.
I think he had 11.
He had 11
11.
children. Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
Okay.
You know, and it's interesting, you know, like, I mean, it's, you know, this is, Esperanza, this, listening to this has been such food for thought. I mean, I'm learning things I really didn't know. And I'm just thinking about the Dominies from the standpoint of being entrepreneurs. There, and I'm just going to ask this question. There was an industrial revolution, there was automation. It seems to me that they could have seized the moment and really expanded into what they were doing. It was like a moment in time where there was Esperanza, I'm going to use this word, there was opportunity
right,
to
right.
become bigger. And can you speak to that, Glenn or Charles? Was there anything like I get what you were trying to bring out. You know, there was maybe a contentment into who they were and everything, but do you think they missed the moment? An opportunity slid by.
I think Nathaniel the Fifth, who is best known for producing the furniture items, did his best. He was the first one in the family to create templates of furniture, which are now housed. Many of them are housed at the Winterthur Museum. So he was doing his own version of mass production at the time. In fact, I think Charles Hummel always says this, that he felt when they were turning legs for chairs or bedsteads, they probably made a few extras and stashed them up in the attic so that if a customer came in, they would be readily available. So I think he was doing his best to mass produce items, but I don't think in the end that they could compete with the Industrial Revolution with the workforces that were available in larger cities, and it just wasn't available. The resources weren't available to them out here.
You had furniture companies popping up in Sag Harbor that were selling chairs to everyone, the latest and greatest, most fashionable chairs. And that's where everybody went to. They were probably half the price. And that's where it all turned. It's not unlike what has happened today, even with fashion. You know, you have clothes that were handmade, beautifully constructed, quality, handmade fabrics, and then it was just fast fashion after that, and it just went from, you know, downhill from there. So it's just a repetition of what's happened with us today.
Yeah,
Yes.
I could sort of see that. You know, the here you had this small shop of craftsmen, and all of a sudden, to put it into a very simplistic present day kind of terms, yeah, but I could buy it at Walmart. You know,
Yes.
I could buy it at right, and yeah, it's going to be a little more ordinary and maybe not as special, but it became just thinking started to change also. I mean, things became mass production, less
Sure.
expensive, shorter wait times. I mean, this is Esperanza. This is really, you know, we always say we like to transport our audience to a time and place. Like I'm transporting myself to this era, and it's really, this is so enlightening for me. I could see how the Dominies, a going business, they were all that, but times change.
Yeah.
Times change.
Exactly.
Now, to answer your point about did they miss a beat? I mean, I often thought, well, could they have gotten involved in, there was the whole new pocket watch made by the railroad, and that took the place of the beautiful European pocket watches, which, by the way, these were European made pocket watches repaired by the Dominies here. So, but could they have made a, if you think about it, a pocket watch that was half the price, that was mass produced? They could have, but maybe knowing them, I can't imagine they would have interest in doing that. They were so into their canvas, their craftsmanship that I just think they just kind
They
of
had a
just
standard and they
a
held to it.
standard.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yes,
Esperanza, one could say they were artists. They
Oh,
thought
they
of
were.
themselves maybe more as artists
for
than
sure.
as business people. I mean, they were
Yeah,
right.
absolutely. 100%. They were artists.
I
And they
mean,
happened to make decent money being artists. You know, they just, and honestly, there were customers, obviously, who still wanted the finest handmade pieces, but they had almost dismantled their small operation over there on North Main Street and moved on to find ways of feeding the children, etc. And they weren't really set up, but people did come to them years later to have repairs made with their older pieces that were inherited from their grandmother, grandfather. So they did do some repair work
Yeah,
for
yeah. And so,
customers.
so by 1940, it's really the end of an era, and they dismantle the workshop and so forth. As you said earlier, the house was demolished. How does all of this end up at Winter Tour?
Okay. Well, um, so yes, 1940 is when the American buildings, first of all, the Dominies moved out in the 1930s. Okay, so they moved from that house and the clock shop. Charles Puff Dominy was still overseeing it, and he was the heir to that property at that time. But in the 40s, that is when the village pleaded with the town to donate some money to help restore the property to save it. But that, of course, because of the war effort, did not happen at that moment, and money was focused elsewhere. So that is when the house needed to be torn down because it was just falling apart. So Dudley Roberts, who had a property over on the beach here, off Further Lane, he purchased the clock shop and the furniture shop buildings and moved them over there and joined them together and made a little like cottage place to have, cocktails at sunset, whatever. And he's the one who saved them because of doing that and
Right.
kept them very well maintained there. The house, which is the center part, the living quarters of the property on North Main Street, that was torn down. As we see photographs of that property being torn down, different individuals around town had pieces of the wood taken from that, and they became part of their addition. So they're scattered about
and and to
elements.
and to just clarify a time wise, so this is circa 1940, we're going to call it,
Correct.
200 years after the Dominies first arrived here, what have you. So it's a 200-year period. Esperanza, under the guise of providing clarification for our audience, I'm actually providing clarification for myself here.
Yes.
So by the 1940s, the Dominies themselves were really at this point no longer in East Hampton. Am I more or
Well,
less, or there was a couple of descended here or there still around,
there were a few still around, absolutely.
but the
Yes.
majority of the family had dispersed to other places.
Yes, the biggest chunk of those individuals, portion of them, moved up with Felix when he moved up island for the lighthouse in Fire Island, and that branch of the family then they had property down in North Carolina, so some ended up there. Yes, so they dispersed at that point.
And North Carolina, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that was still is to an extent a furniture making, uh,
Yes, it is.
for whatever is made domestically, that is.
You're
Uh,
correct.
so okay, so was
You're
that
correct, but they did not make furniture down
they
there.
did
They had
okay.
a large property for hunting, etc. And a lot of families here had properties in North Carolina and South Carolina for like big uh, hunting properties. Yes. Fishing.
Right.
They got into
Right.
fishing. Yeah. Spent
This is
time in the warmer weather there.
This place
fascinating.
got too crowded. They went down.
Yes.
Yeah, like Yogi Berra said, it's so crowded, no one comes here anymore. We're going to start wrapping this up. I mean, this is really, Esperanza, I have to be honest, this took a direction that I really almost wasn't anticipating, but it just happened very organically. It's fascinating, like bringing in the Industrial Revolution, how a family of craftsmen were impacted by that. And,
Well,
it's
it
been,
brings Erwin, to your point about your, high school social studies or whatever. I'm always fascinated with this kind of history because it is local history that portrays these greater panoramas of history that we all studied in school. And yet I wish we had been looking at the Dominies at East Hampton Middle School instead of looking at, I don't know where, Philadelphia or something like
Yeah, and this is a family. Sponsor, we use this term a lot on Air Hamptons when we try to talk about off-radar stories, things that are not that well known. I mean, the Dominies are known in this community. The name is known and everything else, but I think there are storylines that are really being brought out here. And suffice to say, Glenn Purcell and Charles Keller are very modest people, but these are Dominy experts right in our community. I mean, that are, I'm going to say it, these could be some of the foremost Dominy experts in the country that we're privileged enough to talk to. I'm not saying it to be nice, Glenn and Charles. I'm really not that nice a person, but
That's okay.
but really, you are. And I mean, the work, the time you're devoting, and all you've uncovered, it's like Esperanza. It's a treasure trove of information about these families, what they did, and who they were. Can our audience? I mean, we've mentioned the museums. You've done work with, I know, the Moran House, East Hampton Historical Society locally. If our audience wants to delve deeper into Dominy, yes, we understand the house on North Main Street that the Historical Society runs, but what else can they do? Can they reach out to you? Is there a way that you can bring your knowledge out to the greater public in ways that you've been doing or are planning on doing? I'll pose it
Oh
as a
yeah.
question.
Okay, good question. So Charles Hummel, we were lucky enough to work with him for 25 years. And we literally would go down to Winterthur every other month and sit with him for an entire weekend in his office and go over the new discoveries because together we basically found an additional 225 additional pieces of Dominy since he wrote the book with Hammer in Hand. So that 80 of those pieces are on a website that we worked on with him with the University of Wisconsin Chipstone Foundation and Winterthur Museum, and to talk about those items that were just discovered.
So we have this body of knowledge, I think is what we've acquired, a body of knowledge. And we do have a lot of people in the community that reach out to us that know us personally. We've gone to many people's homes, a lot of local families. We've gotten to know a lot of local families over the years who have invited us into their house to look at their pieces. So within the community, we do have people that know us, and very often we get calls from these friends asking us to go to someone's house and look at their pieces.
And actually, Charles Hummel, who, as we know, passed away on the 14th of this month, we promised him that we would write the follow-up to With Hammer in Hand on all the work that we did with him and after. And so we have been working on that. Charles has been working on it for 1 year, on more the history of the Dominies and how they got here, where they actually lived, the timeline, a lot of detail that was not covered in With Hammer in Hand. So we're working on that. And we also, with the discovery of the 225 pieces to date, there are stories behind each of those discoveries. So it makes an interesting read, but it's a little more in the stories of how things unfolded and one category led to another, like one group of Dominy items literally unfolded the next two or three categories. So yes, to your point, that is what we're working on. We feel it is our responsibility to do so.
Wow,
That's
that is
quite the charge. And I'm sorry to hear that Mr. Hummel just recently, I mean, we're recording this in September, and you said he just recently
passed away.
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
Esperanza, this was unraveling a mystery of the Dominies, and we're really grateful for it. Before we wrap up, I have one final question for you, and I'm gonna be like a journalist. So maybe Esperanza, I'm gonna be like someone in the Senate questioning a nominee. So just to get a fast answer, I don't even, not necessarily an elaboration. Is Esperanza, you're going to like this question. A lot of what I do is because I'm trying to seek out Esperanza's approval. So I'm trying to do that right here now. It's the amount of work you've been doing, extraordinary. I think the follow-up to the book, really, I think that is a next logical and very appropriate step. Does the story of the Dominies have national legs? Does this have legs on a national level? Like, should this be a bigger story, or would you consider this hyper local? This is germane to East Hampton, germane to Eastern Long Island, or is there something bigger here?
No, it's worldwide. And Charles Hummel spoke about this on many occasions and why he was pulled to speak in Europe. It is the only example, the Dominy's workshop is the only example in the world of, it's almost like a time capsule, like King Tut's tomb. Everything stayed the way it was, everything was set up the way it was. The tools were still on the benches. The templates were there. The logs were there, belonging to the families who donated them to Winterthur and to East Hampton Library. And it's the only example in the world that exists, and it's known for that. So it's a worldwide story because it gives us exactly the way it was for a craftsman family who had a very strong business in early America.
Sorry, I was going to say, and just to Esperanza's point earlier, this is a family that came to basically a wilderness in 1669 and had to engage and assimilate into the community. They survived the American Revolution. They survived more or less the Industrial Revolution, World War II. The family has an amazing history. So it's really the story of an American family, and that's what intrigues me, of where they came from, how they survived. It is a fascinating story.
Esperanza, and by the way, we're not going to give them a demerit for not giving the short answer because the long answer was so fascinating to me. I couldn't stop it. I mean, it was a fascinating thing.
That was clearly a yes, though.
Yeah, exactly. Clearly a yes. Thank you, Ms. Voice of Reason, as she always is. But Esperanza, and I'm going to close with this because it's important to frame this in the realm of historic preservation as well. And, Esperanza, when Charles and Glenn were bringing out how it was sort of frozen in time and all of the templates were laid out, you know what I thought of? Something very dear and near to both of our hearts, yours in particular, was the Brooks Park property. How we went into Charlotte and James' studio and the paintbrushes were in the cans and everything was there.
As if they just left a moment ago.
And it was the same kind of thing here with the Dominies. Wow. I mean, this was...
And how important that is for people to experience that and then, get to know a family, in this case, so much more intimately.
And to speak to the point of how something, again, this started out as a Dominy. It started out as a history lesson, an unraveling of a mystery, but bringing it back to historic preservation, something both Glenn and Charles have backgrounds in. Once it's gone, it's gone. And if you let it go, and we talk about this with Brooks Park, amongst other places, it's gone. Absolutely. So it really almost puts a magnifier, illuminates all of the important work that Glenn and Charles are doing, makes it even a brighter light shining on it. Glenn Purcell, Charles Keller, keep on keeping on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. And Esperanza, as always, a pleasure.
Thanks, Erwin.
Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.